Have you been hearing people talking about IFS? IFS stands for Internal Family Systems, which is a therapeutic model created by Dr. Richard Schwartz. It is commonly used in psychotherapy and coaching circles. It is a model that I have received a lot of healing from, as has Iris. It's a model I use in my coaching and informed the book I wrote with Deb Schachter, Body Image Inside Out. So we are bringing on Barti and Guthrie, my teachers of IFS, to talk about the model and how it can be used to benefit high performers today.
Welcome to Untrained. Hey, Whitney.
Hi, Iris.
Welcome to another episode of Untrained. We have two guests on today, so it's going to be the four of us. We have Barti, who brings her presence-based approach rooted in internal family systems, mindfulness, and deep listening to her one-on-one and mentor coaching work. And we have Guthrie with us and is the creator of several acclaimed coach training programs, including Coaching with Spirit and Coaching with IFS, and has trained thousands of practitioners around the world, like you, Whitney.
And they have their institute. They have joined together to create the Institute for Healing and Awakening, which they founded just last year.
We have the goal of evolving global well-being.
I love that goal. Well, this podcast is part of that, I hope. So I trained under Barti and Guthrie, my IFS training certification, or IFS informed, and it was so powerful. And I came to the work because I had been receiving internal family systems work, and I wanted to better share it with my clients. And Iris has also been exploring internal family systems, so it seemed like a wonderful way to share the model with our clients as a powerful untraining tool. So Guthrie and Barti, could you each just talk to us about the model, why you're drawn to it, and why you find it to be so powerful?
If you understand three big ideas, it will change how you see yourself and how you see the world, how you see other people. So the first big idea is that we have subpersonalities or parts. The second big idea is that these parts or subpersonalities are part of a system. In other words, the psyche is an ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And if you make a change with one part, it ramifies through the whole system, just as it does in a natural ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And the third big idea, and this is really the central idea of IFS, is that we are not our parts. We are something that IFS calls self with a capital S. And we can think of self as awake awareness. When we have access to self, we are fully present without judgment. In other words, it's like mindfulness. So we can see with clarity. We're naturally curious and not judging, and we have compassion. And so when we have access to self, and someone else is behaving unskillfully, we understand that that unskillful behavior is rooted in past hurt. And it's actually an attempt to protect us. So as we begin to assimilate these three big ideas, we become more compassionate to ourselves and to others.
Some people's parts behave unskillfully. That's such a kind way of saying other people piss us off.
One of the tenets of internal family systems is that all parts are good. So they might piss us off, but their intentions are good. They're really, all of our parts are trying to resource us and serve us in whatever way that they can. Their behaviors are unskillful.
So I'm gonna give an example. Just this morning, I was working with a client who there was an error made, and given the work she does, has big ramifications. And one of the ways one of her less skilled parts responds and has responded her whole life is ruminate on the situation, right? And the part is trying to find some control in the situation. What did I do wrong? What can I learn? What did I do wrong? What can I learn? Right? But it doesn't stop. And that drains her energy, right? That is just sucking the life force out of her because it's never really satisfied. So I'd love for you to use that as maybe a jumping off point to talk about the different parts of firefighters, managers, exiles, and then also parts that are at choice and parts that are not a choice.
Would you like me to jump in here, Guthrie?
Yeah, why don't you start?
Yeah. So I love this model because it gives us a language. We speak this language anyway. I've got a part of me that ruminates. I've got a part of me that wants to do something different. Well, our parts have different jobs in the system. So we call the majority of the parts are protectors, and they protect in two different ways. So there's managers, and the managers are very strategic, and they're working really hard to make sure that that mistake doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. So it's ruminating, looking for an answer, so that your client doesn't have to feel the feeling of what it feels like to make a mistake. And if that manager fails to keep her from that feeling, I'm thinking it's a her, I don't know if you said her or not, mm-hmm. Then the firefighters jump in. And the firefighters are all about making sure that the manager feels, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that whatever pain is here is not felt. So that can be anything that is distracting or behaviors that take a client out of the feeling altogether right in the moment. So managers are strategic, whatever, never again. I'm never again going to let this happen. Mm-hmm. Firefighters are in the moment. They're reactive. And their motto is whatever it takes. And what they're protecting is that part of you that feels the pain. The one that has certain feelings or beliefs about what it is to make a mistake. So your client had some managers working really hard.
Mm-hmm. The reason we're unskillful, the word that Whitney highlighted, is that our protectors learned their jobs when we were 2 years old, 5 years old, 9 years old. So they're parentified children.
You could imagine a 5-year-old trying to figure out how to not make this mistake again. Mm-hmm. No wonder she's ruminating.
And Iris and I have had a lot of conversations about, in elite athletics, in corporate America, manager parts are an asset. Manager parts get the job done.
That on the podcast, I give lots of examples. So I can say that, and I'll reveal I've worked with Barti on some of these things, given the past that I've had with my own coach. And I think one of the things that I am thinking about is that manager part when I came to her was about this perfectionist that had to do everything right. And has to show up so that, if she does something wrong, there's some sort of consequence to it. So I think that's exactly the point, is a lot of us might have these manager parts, but on the outside, and they're extrinsically validated, right? So what makes it so hard sometimes to work through it or to realize that this part needs some care is because on the outside, perfectionism looks like, oh, that's really good. She's, has all these awards. She made an Olympic team. I'll use myself as an example. But meanwhile, inside, it's not feeling okay. And you're not really acting from a place that I'm learning right now of self. You're not acting from a place that really feels connected or grounded in who you are at this moment. It feels not a part of you almost. So I don't know if that example is really helpful, but I do agree that sometimes these parts can often be seen as positive to the outside world. And it might feel like, gosh, there's a dissonance here because this doesn't feel so positive to me.
100%. Right? Like as an athlete, my part that when I failed, went out and, ran a bunch of miles or hills or did more workouts, like that got me accolades. That got me a pat on the back. But internally, there was a not niceness, shall we say, in the heart of it, right? So maybe Guthrie and Barti, you can kind of speak to the way so many of our manager parts get reinforced and how that can make it complicated to understand what's actually going on.
Yeah. So in American culture, which is highly achievement oriented, our parents, teachers, and the culture at large reward accomplished manager behavior because managers are task oriented and they're focused on high functioning. The problem is that they have a narrow view. And they are also doomed to failure because they're trying to replace self. So 99% of Americans or people in general are walking around subject to what their parts think will keep them safe in any one moment. The thinking that people experience in their heads, that is just the chatter of parts. What IFS does, like many of the spiritual traditions, is it helps these parts begin to trust in self. And they, with enough help, they can look to self to be leader. And so they don't need to push us to the point of getting a stress injury. They don't need to punish us to make us achieve. That we can achieve through positive reinforcement. Because when we have access to self, we have more space, we have more curiosity, we have compassion for ourselves and for others, and we can make an informed choice. So this is coming back to a word that Whitney highlighted right at the beginning, which is being at choice. When we have a bad workout and we punish ourselves into a bad result and punish ourselves into trying to achieve a higher result, we're not at choice.
I just want to add here that we also don't want to make our parts the bad guys. That they are resources that we can use, but from a place of self, we can ask them for help, as opposed to having them feel like they have to be in charge. So the tragedy is that they're working really hard to achieve something, and they feel like they're in it all by themselves and they have to accomplish it. They don't know that they have self here who can be the ones making the decisions, making the choices, and they can be the resource. So I just want to make it clear that we don't want to get rid of these parts. We just want to make their jobs easier because they're working, and we all know what this feels like, to be working so hard that it's not fun anymore.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting.
And one of the things that I do with my clients often is just, we get to know the part, we can identify it, right? The one that wants to stay late, let's just say. And once they can locate it in their body, notice how it feels, figure out where it started. And just the simple act of, can you appreciate its intention? Can you appreciate the job it's trying to do on your behalf? And can you start to stay in relationship with it? Shift things. It really can start to shift things. Even if we don't do the entire process of finding the exiles and unburdening and all of that, just starting to be in relationship with those parts can change things. Iris, do you want to say, because we've both been doing this work, do you want to say anything about how that has changed things for you or your clients?
Yeah, I think the shift for me, when I started IFS beforehand, when I was coaching people and people self-coach, when I'm talking to them, they're like, "Oh, gosh, I just need to be less of this," and they would get mad at themselves, right? So these parts would show up, and they wouldn't call them parts per se, but these behaviors that they would have, the clients that I worked with, and they would punish these parts of themselves for showing up. Right. So I've just got to work it harder. And why do I feel so sad about this? Just keep on pushing through. Like there was this argument in their own head, like almost on top of feeling bad, they were making themselves feel worse. Mm-hmm. And definitely growing up in the athletic space, self-compassion, especially in the 90s. Oh my Lord, that was a time. But that was a whole time. But you were kind of taught to work through things by really being very, very negative with yourself. Self-compassion was seen as very, very weak. What happens if I allow myself to feel this way? I'm going to be weak. I'm not going to win, etc. And I know this sounds pretty extreme, but we work with high performers that really feel these things. And all these parts were coming up and they were getting very upset with their parts. And it was interesting when I started doing IFS, or when Whitney was talking about IFS, was this idea of self-compassion, but it made sense in this way. I think just telling someone, have some self-compassion, but in the work of IFS, it was actually being in relationship and really understanding how to insert that self-compassion. How do I actually be there and supportive for the parts of myself, which just saying self-compassion isn't helpful for someone like me, but actually doing the work where, what does this part need? And I'm like, wow, that's a whole different discussion than have some self-compassion.
And I'll just give a recent example with me. Like when I'm around certain family of origins and I don't feel seen, there is this like complete relationship between me getting like all up in my social media. Like I need to feel seen, or working on my business. Like I need to feel seen. And it starts to get a little like jacked up and it doesn't feel good. And I'm like, what's going on here? And it's like, oh, that happened. So then I wanted to feel seen. So then I started to feel a sense of control and these parts took over. And then I can bring some compassion to the parts that just didn't feel seen. So I want to put that concrete idea on the table and punt it back to you, Barti and Guthrie, to do with it as you may.
Yeah. We talk about self-leadership, and you think about what makes a good leader. And a good leader can see and can appreciate the people within the organization. And when we can do that for ourselves, when we can see internally and be a good leader and see our parts as people and treat them with kindness and compassion as people, they become, I don't want to use productive or better, but they add their value to the organization. So when as a self-leader, when we can lead our parts in a way that allows them to bring all of their value, all of their natural gifts to our system through compassionate leadership, it's really a beautiful thing. And I like looking at it that way because we're all so externally focused when we think about the workplace. And here's how I want to treat the people. Here's how I want to lead. and we forget to look inside. How are we leading ourselves?
Yeah. I often say to people when they describe how they lead their team, and I say, are you a member of your own team? And they usually go, no.
IFS works because it's relational. It treats parts like people. And at Foundation, we all want to be seen and celebrated for who we are. And this is what self is able to do for the parts. And when the parts feel seen and understood from their own perspective, they relax and they begin to trust self-leadership. And when that happens, we actually change the chemistry and function of our nervous systems. So there are hormonal and functions in the brain that begin to shift. So just here among ourselves, as we relax together, connect, trust how the conversation's going, we feel good because our system's actually releasing oxytocin. So we're bonding together, and that feels good. It feels safe, and it feels enlivening. When we engage in self-criticism, our nervous system interprets it as a threat, and our adrenal glands secrete cortisol, and we go into fight or flight. So to put it in the terms of polyvagal theory, when we treat ourselves badly, when we're highly critical of ourselves and try to punish ourselves into a higher performance, we're actually putting ourselves in fight or flight. We're straining our system. When we treat ourselves with respect, with self-compassion, as Iris was talking about, we begin to feel good. We enter a ventral vagal state, and there's calm, and we can actually become a calming influence on the people in our environment.
Well, I can definitely attest to the calming, that it can change our physiology, because I've had that experience, and just how powerful our presence is, the way we show up. And I think I've been talking about that, not from an IFS standpoint necessarily with a lot of my clients, but just given the chaos, the stress, the anxiety in the culture, in the workforce, particularly. And what a big offering it is to take as good care of yourself as you can and show up with some calm, with some presence, with some compassion for the people we're interacting with. I know, Iris, you and I have talked about that quite a bit.
Yeah, we've talked about this time period being a good time period for people to slow, to pace a little bit differently, and it's an opportunity to do that. I did want to ask a question for the audience we've talked a lot about the self, and I am new to this. The self. And so the self, because Iris's the self has taken a while to come together. And I would love for Barti and Guthrie to talk a little bit more about the concept of self.
And strengthening it, right? Because the parts pull us away from self. And when we listen to them, we tend to get further and further away from it. And it can feel counterintuitive to do the things that bolster our self energy.
You can think that we have two operating systems. And OS 1.0 is a parts run operating system. And that's how 99% of people are operating 99% of the time. They're led by their parts, and these are parts that have only partial information. If they're injured, they're not seeing clearly. Self is OS 2.0. It is always present. It doesn't need to be strengthened. It simply needs to be accessed. And what what IFS does is it helps the parts relax, and we begin to gain access to self. And as we gain access to self, we gain access to the emergent properties of self. The inner peace you're looking for actually already exists. The clarity that you want, it's already present. The confidence that you want is already there when the parts stop distracting you.
Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it.
So IFS is basically coming into relationship, loving relationship with the barriers.
Mm.
And as that happens, the barriers begin to soften and to drop. And our system then becomes capable of opening into awake awareness. In every class that Barti and I co-lead, we begin with what we call the 4 building blocks of presence. And presence is just is a synonym for self.
Mm-hmm.
Building block number 1 is to find your ground. So if you're seated, land in your seat. Building block number 2 is to find your core, is to feel in to your torso and feel what's there. Building block 3 is to let your awareness open out into the space around you. We call that field. And then 4 is to come into focus on whatever's in front of you.
Mm.
And each of those, ground, core, field, and focus, each one can be a doorway to self, but together they make it more probable.
I want to just say, I think that Iris was kind of pointing towards, like, how do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know when you have access to self? And the internal family systems has 8 C words that everyone will be familiar with. And Guthrie and I like to add a 9th. And I'm just going to name them, because when you can feel these authentically, they're really good indicators that there is some self-access present. Compassion is one of them. Curiosity, a sense of calm, a sense of courage, confidence, clarity, creativity, and connection. And the 9th one is choice. Do you feel like you are in choice of what your next step is going to be, or does it feel like I have to do this or else?
A good example, I bet there are people in your audience who are caretakers and who feel compelled to take care of other people.
I see a hand going up.
I've worked with many of those parts. We are more at choice.
Yeah. So when you're not at choice, you have to go into caretaking mode. When you're at choice, you make the decision, do I have the resources to do it now? Am I the right person to do it? Am I invested in the outcome? Am I invested in a timetable that this person has to feel better within a certain amount of time?
And it can feel like, not that I've quit smoking, but quitting something hard, right? Like it's not like, oh, I'm in so much self-energy and no, I'm not helping you. It can feel like, I really want to help that person, but I'm choosing not to at first, right? So I just want to name that element of the process.
What you're doing when you do that, Whitney, is you're starting to allow the part that's like going, so hard, to see that self is present, making a choice, and that it's okay, that the world's not going to fall apart, that you're not going to be loved anymore, all of those things, that self has the resources to be able to be with whatever the outcome is. So it's beginning to allow the parts to see what's possible when self leads.
Yeah. So that comes back to one of the questions that I felt so important to answer is, what does it feel like when a part is at choice? And I think you're conscious of it. You're aware of it. You're aware of what it wants to do. And it is aware that you are a resource for it. And it doesn't have to do what it has always done.
Yeah. And it's available. So Barti and I lead a lot of trainings. And before we go into the training, we create timelines. And so I can look at the timeline and see where we are in the class and see that we're behind the timeline. And if I'm not blended with my timekeeper, that's fine. We dance in the moment and we adjust. If I'm blended with my timekeeper or my perfectionist, I begin to bend everything to meet this artificial deadline. And I can feel the stress in my system. There's a contraction inside.
That's another benefit of being able to work with our systems in this way, is that those contractions take a lot of energy.
Oh, so much energy.
To keep things pushed down, to keep things out of sight, to keep things out of the way, to keep things from being felt. And when those parts aren't working so hard, your system gets flooded with all the energy that it had been expending doing those things.
And I think that's what the good news is relative to some people in some pretty, Iris, I'd love to hear you talk about this too, but a lot of people's jobs these days, especially as other people are getting laid off and more is getting piled on their plate, are like just untenable. Like it's just too much. So if you've got the stress of the job and then you've got the stress of all your parts that maybe have been activated, that's just it's hard to watch, right? But the good news is that we can work with our parts and quiet them down and have them take less energy, and there's more for the job and the life and all of those things. So that's part of what I think is the good news here. Iris, what do you want to say about that?
I think it would be, I might throw to Barti and Guthrie if we had an example, because I think it's hard unless you've actually done IFS to understand.
I can offer some if you want.
Yeah. So if we can do more of an example of, even if you generalize a part, it would be useful maybe for the audience to hear it, because I was listening to another IFS podcast as well on this subject matter, and I think it really helped the audience to hear how you work through a part or how one works with a part.
So I'm thinking of a client I've worked with. He chronically just signs up for the next role, the next higher thing, the next, and we might meet and I'll say, well, like, oh, why did you want to take that role? And he kind of goes, well, I don't know. And doing some of the work and identifying some of the parts that are constantly driving and constantly want to look good. There was significant lack. There was a lot of problems with his caretakers growing up, and he wanted to feel a part of things and he wanted to feel successful, right? So that's a part that was working very hard and continues to show up every day today.
That's a great example, because that part learned its job when he was in his single digits, when he was 5 or 6 or 8, somewhere in there. And he learned to manage his anxiety, which he caught from his family of origin, by overfunctioning. So he probably became more mature than his years at an early age, and he probably got rewarded for that. And he didn't get a chance to be a playful, carefree, silly kid. And now he's no longer at choice. This part learned its charter when he was, say, 6 years old, and it knows how to only run that program. If we were to get to know that part of him, that's always taking a new role, that's always overfunctioning in the workplace, we would find out that that part's really proud of its capacities. It might even say it enjoys its job. But if you then asked it, are you tired? It will admit to being exhausted. And so the next step with that part is to offer it a hypothetical situation and to say, if we could find another way to do things where you would get to perform at a high level, but without so much stress and fatigue, would you be interested? And they would say, oh, that's not possible. And we would say, nonetheless, would you be interested? They will say yes. And from there, there can be more steps, which I can tell you about, but we can introduce it to a resource that it's never depended on before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Self.
Right. So that part is no longer feeling all alone, trying to manage an unmanageable task through performance, through achievement.
That is the tragedy.
Yes, it is. It really is.
It is. I can remember there was a moment I had been studying IFS intensively with the founder of IFS for 7 or 8 years. And then I was sitting in another training with him and the meditation teacher called Lochtelli. And I got for the first time how even the highest level managers, brilliant managers, are doomed to failure. I felt the tragedy so deeply, I started sobbing.
Mm.
They can't do what they're attempting to do.
No.
Which is to make you or me safe.
Yeah. Yeah. I do feel deeply sad some days.
Yeah, it's tragic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when we're able as practitioners to be with those parts and let them know that we are moved by the tragedy of their situation, they begin to trust us. And we can help them find a new way of being.
I think oftentimes when I'm working with clients, I hear them say, this is who I am.
Mm.
And some of these managers that have been around for so long, that are so effective in getting us to run hard, to, be overly productive and successful, we think that that's our nature. And it really takes some space to be able to sit and say, just maybe, this isn't my nature. Because if it was, it would feel better.
Yeah.
That this might be something else.
Yeah.
And I just want to offer that to the listeners, that oftentimes who we think we are is actually some of our most powerful parts.
And who are running off charters that were developed before age 10.
Yeah.
Right. So I might be naturally creative and naturally like to share things, but the manic part, that's a part that I don't need helping me out anymore. Right.
Before we move on from there, I think you also, when we work together, have me describe the part more of like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? So there is an element of holisticness. It's not just us saying there's this part and here's how it is. I think the deeper part of IFS uses the whole body. So can you speak to that a little bit more?
Sure. So what we want to do is start to create that space between self and the parts. And the way that we can do that so that there can be a relationship. The way we do that is we start to kind of flesh out the part. And some people are really visual and they see the part. Some people can feel the part. It's like someone has put a weight on my chest, or I can feel it. It's like butterflies, or it's like a big cloud. So being able to come into the experience of the part separate from self is really important so the dialogue can begin. So this isn't just a cognitive exercise. This is an experiential exercise. This is how I experience the part in my system, in my psyche. Does that answer your question, Iris?
Yep.
Okay.
I just want to jump. That's my favorite part. And we sometimes create like nicknames for them and, sort of endear them. And that's a big part of what I use a lot of parts work or internal family system in the book I wrote with Deb Schachter, Body Image Inside Out. And particularly with body image, that's important because the parts live in our bodies, and it can be really valuable to learn the sensations, to learn the colors and the descriptors associated with them. So I don't mind making my clients a little uncomfortable when I say, like, how does that feel in or around your body? Because it always leads us somewhere unexpected.
Whitney, I know this is towards our closing time of the podcast. We're coming to the end. And usually we like to ask, are there any things that you want the audience to know or to take away from today's conversation? Or maybe there isn't something that we didn't cover that you want to make sure the audience knows about this practice of internal family systems. And I'll start with you. I'll throw it to Barti because I'm looking at you on the screen.
Yeah. I think what I'll make an offering that might be helpful is as you move through your day and you start to feel different feelings or have different sensations, like I'm mad or I'm really angry, to try practicing with IFS language and saying, there's a part of me that's angry. There's a part of me that's really sad. There's a part of me that feels like I've got to stay here till 9 o'clock or I'll never get my job done.
Or that feels like a failure. There's a part of me. Mm-hmm.
There's a part of me that feels like a failure, because that gives more room for compassion for the suffering that is just part of being a human being. And you are so much more than your anger. You're so much more than these other things. So those are my closing words.
I guess I would build on what Barti said, and I'm going to draw on the work of Kristen Neff, who's one of the premier psychologists researching compassion. And when we feel that pain inside, is to stop and say, to acknowledge, to not push it away and say, this is a moment of suffering. Just that begins to soften the experience. But if you could then say, suffering is part of life, you're actually beginning to feel connected to other people, because there is no one who does not suffer. It's what we signed up for when we agreed to incarnate. And so that brings us into connection, which changes the hormonal balance in our favor. And then you could say, may I be kind to myself. And this allows us to shift into, we begin to access self with a capital S.
What about you, Whitney? This is, you were very inspired to pull this together, and it's been fun. What are your final thoughts?
I think it's been said. Just if anything resonates here, there's books out there on internal family systems. Barti does one-on-one work. I do one-on-one work in the executive coaching space. Guthrie and Barti have training for folks, for coaches, practitioners, different people who are, maybe I'll let you give a little pitch about the Institute. And we'll also put it in the notes so people can learn more. And we'll put a couple books in there too.
So Barti and I co-founded the Institute for Healing and Awakening, and it is dedicated to evolving global well-being. Our 2 signature courses are Coaching with Spirit. We train life coaches, and Coaching with IFS.
And that's the one
which
I
is
took
a
and loved.
full program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Iris, what about you? Any final thoughts, words?
I can only just speak to my experience. So I was diagnosed with PTSD after not making the Olympic team in 2008. I've had years and years of therapy. I've worked with many, many people. I've had imposter syndrome. I've had all these things. And I think one of the things that's really helped me, and then those were all great and got me to a certain point. But I think that IFS was very life-changing for me. And I had been seeking this self, this calmness, this place of like, gosh, I want to feel more grounded. This doesn't feel like me. And I found IFS through you, Whitney, and I really feel like I found some tools that really help me move through and be more compassionate to myself, but also to others as well. So it's really opened the door for my healing. So I do want to say it was really helpful for me. I can only speak to my own experience, but I'll just offer that to others who might feel like, gosh, I've done all these things, and maybe there's one other thing out there that maybe I could try that could help me in my healing process and healing journey. So I just thought I'd add that piece of it.
I love that.
Yeah. So at the end of every podcast, Whitney, what do we say?
Keep untraining.
Keep untraining. And if you like our content, become one of our tribe, the Untrained tribe. You can like us on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a love note if you want to.
We love love notes.
We love love notes. Or subscribe on YouTube.